My name is Emily Carter. The day after my father's funeral, my stepmother smiled at me for the first time in years. Not because she was happy to see me, because she believed she had finally won. She waited until every guest had left the house. The flowers were still sitting by the front door. The smell of funeral lilies filled every room. I was standing beside the living room window, staring at the driveway where my father's black hearse had disappeared only a few hours earlier. I hadn't cried since the funeral ended, not because I wasn't heartbroken, because my father had always told me something. Never let the people who hurt you enjoy watching you break. I remembered those words as I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, slow, confident, victorious. She stopped beside me, crossed her arms, and smiled. "Emily," she said softly, "I hope you enjoyed saying goodbye to this house." I looked at her. She continued, "Because tomorrow, you won't own a single thing here." Behind her, my stepbrother Ryan laughed. My stepsister Chloe didn't even hide the smile on her face. She quietly lifted her phone and started recording me. They wanted my reaction. They wanted tears. They wanted me begging. Instead, I simply asked, "Is that what you think Dad wanted?" My stepmother laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, your father was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. The lawyer will explain everything tomorrow." Ryan walked past me, shoulder checking me hard enough to make me lose my balance. "This house belongs to us now," he whispered. "You've lived here long enough." Chloe added, "Don't make tomorrow embarrassing. I'd hate to watch security drag you out." They all laughed. I didn't, because none of them knew that 3 weeks before my father died, he had secretly called me to the hospital, and that meeting changed everything. 3 weeks earlier, the hospital room smelled like disinfectant and coffee. Dad looked weaker than I'd ever seen him. Machines beeped beside his bed. When the nurse left, he closed the door himself. Then he looked straight at me. "Emily, I need you to promise me something." His voice was barely louder than a whisper. I nodded. "Anything." He reached into the bedside drawer, pulled out a thick brown envelope. It was sealed. Across the front, written in his handwriting, were 7 words: "Open only if they betray you." I stared at it. "What is this?" He slowly placed it into my hands. "I hope you never have to open it." I frowned. "Dad," he interrupted me, "if our family stays together, burn it. But if anyone tries to take your future, promise me you'll open it." I could barely breathe. "What are you talking about?" His eyes moved toward the hospital door, almost like he was afraid someone might hear us. Then he said something I still think about every single day. "Not everyone who smiles at you is on your side." I wanted answers. But before I could ask another question, the nurse returned. Dad smiled again. The conversation ended. Forever. Because 2 weeks later, he slipped into a coma, and he never woke up. Now, I was standing inside the same house he had built 30 years earlier, holding my grief together, while 3 people silently celebrated my loss. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every room reminded me of him. His reading glasses still rested beside his favorite chair. His unfinished crossword puzzle was still on the kitchen table. His old jacket still hung near the garage door. Everything looked exactly the same, except the house felt empty. Around midnight, I heard voices downstairs. I quietly stepped into the hallway. The lights in the kitchen were on. My stepmother, Ryan, and Chloe were celebrating with champagne the night after my father's funeral. Ryan raised his glass. "To new beginnings." They all laughed. Then my stepmother said something that made my entire body freeze. "The lawyer doesn't know everything." Ryan looked confused. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "There are documents he'll never see." Chloe frowned. You already handled that? My stepmother nodded confidently. Months ago. If Richard had lived another year, things would have been complicated. But now, everything is exactly where it belongs. I stopped breathing. What documents? What had she done? I wanted to walk into the kitchen, demand answers. Instead, I quietly walked back upstairs, because my father had always said, the person with the truth never needs to rush. The next morning, I dressed in black, placed the sealed envelope inside my handbag, and drove to the lawyer's office. The entire family was already there. My stepmother wore white, not black, white, as if she had come to celebrate. Ryan leaned back in his chair with a grin. Chloe kept checking her phone. Then the lawyer entered carrying a thick folder. He looked tired. He offered his condolences, then opened the file. As requested by Mr. Richard Carter, we'll now read the final will. The room became silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, looked at the first page, then suddenly stopped. His expression changed. He flipped back, then forward again, frowned, looked at my stepmother, then looked at me, and quietly asked, Emily, before we continue, did your father ever give you a sealed envelope? My heart stopped. I slowly reached into my handbag, placed the untouched brown envelope on the table. The lawyer stared at it, while my stepmother's smile disappeared for the very first time. No one spoke. The lawyer kept staring at the sealed envelope as if he already knew it could change everything. My stepmother forced a nervous smile. Richard was sentimental, she said with a little laugh. I'm sure it's just another letter. The lawyer didn't answer. Instead, he looked directly at me. Emily, has this envelope ever been opened? I shook my head. No. I promised my father I wouldn't open it unless someone betrayed me. For the first time, Ryan's smile disappeared. What kind of ridiculous drama is this? He snapped. The lawyer calmly replied, Your father mentioned this envelope when he signed his final documents. The room became silent again. He instructed me that if Emily ever presented it, I was to stop reading the will immediately. My stepmother's face turned pale. What? The lawyer nodded. Those were Mr. Carter's exact instructions. I slowly slid the envelope across the table. My hands were shaking, not because I was afraid, because I finally understood. Dad had expected this day. The lawyer carefully examined the seal. It was untouched. He opened it with a small letter opener and removed 3 items: a handwritten letter, a sealed USB drive, and another envelope marked, For my attorney only. The lawyer frowned. He opened the handwritten letter first. His eyes moved across the page. Then, he stopped reading. His expression completely changed. He looked at my stepmother, then back at the letter. He read one paragraph again. This time, much slower. Ryan slammed his hand on the table. Just read it. The lawyer took a deep breath. This letter begins, If Emily has given you this envelope, it means the people I feared most have already shown their true intentions. Nobody moved. I loved my wife deeply. After she passed away, I believed I could rebuild my family. Instead, I ignored warning signs for years. My stepmother crossed her arms. This is absurd, the lawyer continued reading. To my attorney, before my will is read, please verify whether the documents inside my office safe still exist. The lawyer suddenly stopped. He slowly looked at my stepmother. Mrs. Carter, has Mr. Carter's office safe been opened since his death? She answered too quickly. No. The lawyer stared at her for several seconds, then quietly asked, Are you certain? Of course. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The lawyer pressed the intercom on his desk. Melissa, could you please bring me Mr. Carter's security inventory? Ryan stood up. What security inventory? The lawyer ignored him. Within a minute, his assistant entered carrying another file. The lawyer opened it. His eyebrows lifted. Then he quietly sighed. As I suspected, he turned another page. Mr. Carter's office safe automatically records every access. My stepmother's confidence cracked. Ryan looked confused. What does that even mean? The lawyer placed the report on the table. The safe was opened. He checked the date. 6 days after Mr. Carter entered hospice. I looked at my stepmother. She refused to meet my eyes. The lawyer continued. It was opened at 2:14 a.m. Ryan slowly looked toward his mother. You said nobody touched Dad's office. She hesitated. I forgot. The lawyer didn't react. Instead, he asked another question. Mrs. Carter, why did you tell everyone the safe had never been opened? Silence. She finally answered. I didn't think it mattered. The lawyer looked down at the handwritten letter again, then read another sentence. If the safe has been opened without Emily present, please continue with the second instruction. A chill ran through my body. There were instructions for everything. Dad had planned every step. The lawyer opened the envelope labeled, "For my attorney only." Inside was a notarized document. He read it carefully, then looked up. Before the will can legally continue, I must verify whether specific documents have been altered or removed. Ryan laughed sarcastically. So now we're detectives? No, the lawyer replied calmly. We're following your father's legal instructions. Chloe finally spoke. This is wasting everyone's time. The lawyer looked at her. Actually, if these instructions are accurate, today may become a fraud investigation. The room froze. Fraud? My stepmother stood up. This meeting is over. The lawyer's voice became firm. No. She stared at him. You don't have the authority to accuse me. I'm not accusing you. I'm following your late husband's written instructions. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, real fear. The lawyer reached for the USB drive. My client specifically instructed me never to view this unless Emily delivered the envelope. Ryan folded his arms. So play it. The lawyer inserted the USB into his computer. A single video file appeared. The timestamp shocked me. Recorded 9 days before my father's death. The lawyer clicked play. Dad appeared on the screen. He looked weak, but his voice was steady. If you're watching this, then Emily kept her promise. My throat tightened. Seeing him alive again hurt more than I expected. He looked directly into the camera. Emily, if this video is playing, I'm sorry. I hoped our family would choose love over greed. He paused for a moment. They didn't. My stepmother suddenly stood. I don't have to sit through this. The lawyer raised his hand. You do, Dad continued. Margaret, he said her name calmly. If you're still in this room, then you ignored every chance I gave you to tell the truth yourself. Her face lost all color. Ryan stared at his mother. What is he talking about? Dad reached toward a stack of papers beside him. You believed removing certain documents from my office would protect you. He smiled sadly. But you never realized I already made certified copies. The room became completely silent. Then Dad said one sentence. That changed everything. I've hidden proof of who really forged my signature. Ryan slowly turned toward his mother. What? Forged signature? She whispered only one word. Richard. Dad looked directly into the camera one last time. The evidence isn't in my office. It isn't in my bank. And it isn't inside this envelope. He smiled faintly. It's somewhere only Emily would ever think to look. The video ended. Nobody spoke. Ryan looked at his mother with confusion. Chloe's hands were trembling. The lawyer slowly closed his laptop. Then he looked at me. Emily, I think your father just turned this inheritance meeting into the beginning of something much bigger. No one moved. The lawyer slowly closed his laptop, but the silence inside that conference room was louder than anything my father had just said. Ryan stared at his mother. Mom. What did Dad mean by a forged signature? She forced herself to laugh. Richard was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. He probably imagined things. The lawyer immediately shook his head. I've represented Mr. Carter for 23 years. I can assure everyone in this room. He was thinking very clearly. My stepmother's smile disappeared again. The lawyer turned toward me. Emily, did your father ever mention a place that only the two of you shared? I closed my eyes for a second. Hundreds of memories flashed through my mind. Fishing trips, birthday dinners, long drives, Christmas mornings. Nothing felt important. Then, one memory suddenly refused to leave. I opened my eyes. There is one place. The lawyer leaned forward. Where? My father's workshop. Ryan laughed. The old garage? Dad hadn't gone in there for years. I looked at him. No. He went there almost every Sunday. Ryan frowned. What? He just stopped taking you. Ryan didn't answer, because it was true. After I left for college, Dad and I started spending Sunday mornings together in the workshop behind the house. Everyone thought we were fixing old furniture. Sometimes we did. But mostly, we talked about life, about business, about trust, about mistakes, about people. Dad always said, wood remembers every cut. People do too. The lawyer nodded. I think that's where we need to go. My stepmother immediately stood. Absolutely not. The lawyer looked at her. Why? Because that property belongs to me now. The lawyer calmly replied. Not until probate is complete. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she had no argument. 25 minutes later, all of us stood outside Dad's workshop. The small wooden building looked exactly the way I remembered it. The faded blue paint, the old porch light, the rusted wind chime. I hadn't stepped inside since the day he entered the hospital. I reached for the handle. It was locked. Ryan smiled. Looks like that's the end of your little treasure hunt. I ignored him. Then I remembered something. Dad never used the front door. He always entered through the side entrance. I walked around the building. Everyone followed. There, hidden behind an old shelf, was another door, still unlocked. The lawyer smiled. I think your father expected this. I slowly pushed the door open. The familiar smell of cedar wood filled the room. Everything was untouched. His workbench, his old radio, his coffee mug. Even his reading glasses were still lying beside a half-finished birdhouse. For a second, I forgot everyone else was there. It felt like Dad had simply stepped outside and would return any minute. Then I noticed something strange. The birdhouse. Dad never left projects unfinished. Never. Not once. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should. Ryan rolled his eyes. It's a birdhouse. The lawyer quietly said, Open it. I turned it over. The bottom panel was attached with tiny brass screws. Dad never used brass screws. Never. He always used black steel. My heartbeat sped up. I grabbed the screwdriver lying on the bench, unscrewed the panel. Inside was a small metal key. Nothing else. Ryan laughed. Seriously? A key? I smiled, because I knew my father. One clue always led to another. The lawyer picked up the key. No label. No number. What does it open? I looked around the workshop, then my eyes landed on Dad's oldest tool cabinet, an antique oak cabinet that no one had touched in years. I walked toward it, inserted the key. It fit perfectly. Click. The cabinet door slowly opened. Inside, there were no tools, only a single black box. My stepmother suddenly took one step forward. No. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It sounded afraid. The lawyer looked at her. You know what's inside? She quickly answered. I've never seen that box. But her voice betrayed her. I carefully lifted it onto the workbench. There was another note taped to the lid, in Dad's handwriting. Emily, if you've reached this box, I'm sorry I was right about them. My hands started shaking. I opened the lid. Inside were dozens of neatly organized folders. Every folder had a date. Every folder had a name. Every folder had copies of legal documents, bank statements, property records, insurance papers, business contracts. The lawyer slowly flipped through them. Then he froze. "Oh," he whispered. "This changes everything." Ryan stepped closer. "What?" The lawyer held up one document. "It appears Mr. Carter changed his will 3 different times." Ryan frowned. "What?" "The copy filed with the court isn't the latest version." My stepmother suddenly interrupted. "Those are just copies." The lawyer ignored her. He kept reading. Then his eyes widened again. "There should have been one final amendment, dated 11 days before Mr. Carter entered hospice." He searched every folder, then stopped. "It's missing." My stepmother let out a breath, almost as if she had been holding it for minutes. The lawyer noticed. "So, someone removed only one document." "Only one, not all of them, just the most important one." I looked at my stepmother. She avoided my eyes. Then, I noticed something else inside the box. A small digital voice recorder. The battery light still blinked green. The lawyer looked surprised. "I didn't know Richard kept recordings." Neither did I. I pressed play. Static filled the room. Then, my father's voice, calm, steady. "If you're hearing this, then someone removed the final amendment." Everyone froze. I expected that. You see, the amendment wasn't the real evidence. A long pause. "It was bait," Ryan whispered. "What?" Dad continued. "I wanted to know who would steal it. And I made sure they'd leave fingerprints somewhere they could never erase." My stepmother's face turned white. The lawyer slowly looked toward her. She took a step backward, then another. For the first time, I realized something. She wasn't scared of losing money. She was scared because my father had been one step ahead of her, all along. My stepmother took another step backward. It wasn't dramatic. Most people in that room probably didn't even notice. I did. Because for the first time in nearly 15 years, the woman who always had an answer looked terrified. The lawyer slowly picked up the digital recorder. He replayed the last sentence. "I made sure they'd leave fingerprints somewhere they could never erase." Ryan frowned. "What fingerprints? What is he talking about?" Nobody answered. The lawyer reached into the black box again. Hidden beneath the folders was a folded blueprint. He carefully opened it across the workbench. It was the floor plan of our house. Every room had been marked, except one, my father's private study. Across that room, he had drawn a red circle. Inside the circle were 4 handwritten words. "Start where she lied." The lawyer looked at me. "Emily, who was the last person allowed inside your father's study before he entered hospice?" I didn't even have to think. "My stepmother." Ryan looked at her. "You told us Dad locked that room himself." She swallowed. "That's what he wanted everyone to believe." The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "So you were inside?" "It was only to organize paperwork." "By yourself?" "Yes." "How long?" "I don't remember." That answer bothered me. My father had always documented everything. Dates, times, receipts, appointments. He never trusted memory when facts existed. If he'd suspected betrayal, he wouldn't have relied on assumptions. He would have left proof. The lawyer folded the blueprint. "I think it's time we visit the study." Less than an hour later, we were back at the house. The same house my stepmother had promised I would leave with nothing. Now, everyone entered in complete silence. Even Ryan stopped making sarcastic comments. The study door stood at the end of the hallway, dark oak, brass handle, still locked. The lawyer removed a small envelope from his briefcase. "Richard gave me this 6 years ago." Inside was a key. He unlocked the door. The room looked untouched. Books lined every wall. A leather chair faced the fireplace. Family photographs covered one shelf. My mother, me, Dad. Then, almost no pictures after he remarried. I'd never noticed that before. The lawyer slowly walked toward the desk. Everything appeared normal. Pens, letters, a calendar, an old fountain pen. Then he stopped. "Emily, come here." I stood beside him. He pointed toward the edge of the desk. There, barely visible, was a tiny scratch. Not random, deliberate. 3 short lines, then 1 longer line beneath them. I stared. It looked familiar, very familiar. Suddenly, I remembered. When I was 10 years old, Dad created little puzzles for me. Whenever he wanted me to find a birthday present, he carved tiny symbols into furniture. 3 short lines. 1 long line. It wasn't damage. It meant, look underneath. Without saying a word, I knelt beside the desk, ran my hand beneath the bottom drawer. Nothing. Then, my fingers touched something smooth. Tape. I carefully peeled it away. A tiny brass key fell into my hand. Ryan stared. "Another key." The lawyer smiled. Richard loved making people learn the truth. The key had a small number engraved on it. 317. No label. Just the number. I looked around the room. There wasn't a single lock marked 317. Ryan sighed loudly. "This is ridiculous." "We've spent hours chasing keys." Before anyone could answer, the lawyer asked me something unexpected. "Emily, did your father ever rent a safety deposit box?" I froze, then slowly nodded. "When I was a teenager, he took me to First National Bank every December. He called it," I smiled faintly, "our annual responsibility trip." The lawyer's eyes lit up. "What branch?" "Downtown." Ryan suddenly looked at his mother. She had gone completely pale. "Mom, did you know about this?" She shook her head too quickly. "No." The lawyer quietly placed the key inside his pocket. "I think we just found box 317. 30 minutes later, we entered First National Bank. The branch manager greeted the lawyer immediately. After verifying my father's death certificate, she checked the records. Her expression changed. "There is a safety deposit box. Number..." She looked down. 317. My heartbeat doubled. The manager continued reading. "It can only be opened by..." She paused. "Emily Carter." Every head slowly turned toward me. Ryan whispered, "Only you?" The manager nodded. Those were Mr. Carter's written instructions. My stepmother suddenly stood. "This is ridiculous." "I'm his wife." The manager politely smiled. "I'm sorry. Legally, that doesn't matter." A few minutes later, the manager unlocked the vault, then stepped away, leaving me alone with the lawyer. The heavy metal box slid out slowly. I carried it to the private viewing room. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Dad had prepared all of this, years before he died. He knew. He actually knew. The lawyer nodded gently. "Whenever you're ready." I inserted the brass key, turned it. Click. The lid opened. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't property deeds. It was something far more dangerous. A thick leather journal, a second USB drive, several sealed envelopes, and a small velvet pouch. The lawyer carefully opened the journal. The very first page read, "If you're reading this, someone I trusted has already betrayed us." My throat tightened. Page after page. Dad had documented everything. Dates, conversations, financial transactions, meetings, photographs, copies of emails, every strange thing he noticed after marrying my stepmother. The lawyer kept turning pages. Then suddenly, he stopped. His breathing changed. "What is it?" He slowly turned the journal toward me. Attached to one page was a photograph, a security camera image. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m., 9 months before my father entered hospice. The picture showed my stepmother standing inside my father's private office, holding a stack of legal papers. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her was someone none of us expected. Ryan. I looked at the photo again, then again. Ryan slowly stepped backward. I've never seen that before. My stepmother grabbed his arm. Don't say another word. The lawyer slowly closed the journal. His face had completely changed. I think, he said quietly, this stopped being an inheritance dispute a long time ago. It may now be a criminal conspiracy. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then another message appeared. Don't trust the lawyer. He doesn't have the whole truth. Check the velvet pouch before anyone else sees it. I stared at the screen. My heart began pounding, because only one person could possibly know what was inside that safety deposit box. I read the message 3 times. Don't trust the lawyer. Check the velvet pouch before anyone else sees it. My pulse started racing. There were only 4 people who knew this safety deposit box even existed. Me, the lawyer, the bank manager, and my father. Except my father had been dead for almost 3 weeks. I quietly locked my phone without saying a word. The lawyer was still studying Dad's journal. Ryan stood frozen. My stepmother looked like she wanted to run. Nobody was watching me. Very carefully, I reached toward the velvet pouch. I slipped it into the sleeve of my blazer. No one noticed, not even the lawyer. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. The lawyer placed everything back inside the deposit box except the journal, the photographs, and the USB drive. We'll begin authenticating all of this immediately, he said. I nodded. Outwardly, I looked calm. Inside, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. Who knew about the pouch, and why did they warn me instead of calling the police? That evening, I checked into a small hotel near the river. I didn't want to return to my father's house. Not anymore. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a battlefield. After locking my room, I placed the velvet pouch on the bed. It was surprisingly light. There was no label, no initials, nothing. I slowly untied the string. Inside was a single silver key, smaller than the others. Attached to it was an old brass tag. Box 9. That was all. No explanation, no note. Just Box 9. I spent the next hour searching through my memories. Dad owned dozens of cabinets, storage lockers, tool chests. None of them were numbered. Then, I remembered something. When I was 12, Dad rented a small workshop outside town after a storm damaged our garage. The building had rows of storage units. Each one was numbered. His unit was... I closed my eyes. 9. I whispered it out loud. Storage unit 9. The next morning, I drove there alone. The storage facility looked exactly as I remembered. Rust-colored buildings, chain-link fences, security cameras. An elderly manager sat behind the front desk. When I introduced myself, his face softened. Richard's daughter? I smiled. Yes. He stood immediately. I've been waiting for you. I blinked. Waiting? He reached beneath the counter, pulled out a sealed envelope. Your father told me if anything ever happened to him, I'd know when the right person arrived. I stared at the envelope. My father's handwriting. Again. Only after box 9 is opened. My hands trembled. Can I ask you something? The manager nodded. Did anyone else ever ask about box 9? His expression changed. Yes. My heart skipped. When? About a week after your father entered hospice. Who? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly opened a visitor log, then turned it toward me. There, written clearly, was my stepmother's name. Right beneath it, Ryan's. They wanted access, he said quietly. I refused. Why? Because your father changed the authorization years ago. Only one name remained. He looked directly at me. Yours. A few minutes later, I unlocked storage unit 9. Dust floated through the sunlight. Old furniture, boxes, Christmas decorations. Nothing unusual. I almost laughed. Had I really driven all this way for another dead end? Then I remembered something Dad used to say. If something looks ordinary, look behind it. I moved an old bookshelf. Nothing. I opened dusty boxes. Nothing. Then I noticed one object that didn't belong. A brand new steel filing cabinet. Everything else inside the unit was at least 10 years old. The cabinet looked almost new. It was locked. The silver key fit perfectly. Inside were only two things: a thick black binder and an old photo album. I opened the binder first. The title nearly stopped my heart. Carter Family Trust. I frowned. Trust? I had never heard Dad mention a trust. Never. I quickly flipped through the pages. My breathing became faster. The trust owned the house, the business, the investment accounts, the lake property, everything, legally. None of it belonged directly to my father anymore. It belonged to the trust. And according to the final signed page, I was the only successor trustee. I checked the signatures. Everything had been notarized 5 years ago. 5 years. Which meant the will wasn't the most important document at all. The trust was. The trust was. Then I opened the photo album. At first, it looked completely ordinary. Family vacations, birthday parties, fishing trips. Then, one photograph slipped onto the floor. It landed face down. When I picked it up, I froze. It wasn't a family photo. It was a surveillance photograph, taken through a window. My father, sitting across from the lawyer. Both men were looking directly at someone standing outside the window, someone hidden from the camera. On the back, Dad had written one sentence. He never knew someone was watching him. I turned the photo over again, zoomed in with my phone. There, reflected faintly in the glass, was a woman's face. Not my stepmother. Someone else. Someone wearing sunglasses. Someone I had seen before. I just couldn't remember where. At that exact moment, my phone rang. It was the lawyer. The moment I answered, he didn't even say hello. His voice sounded urgent. "Emily, leave the storage unit. Right now." I frowned. "Why?" His next sentence sent a chill through my entire body. "Because someone just broke into my office. And the only thing they stole was your father's journal." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. The lawyer repeated himself. "Emily, are you still there?" "Yes." "Listen carefully. Someone broke into my office less than 10 minutes ago. They ignored the computers. They ignored the cash. They ignored every client file. They only took one thing. Your father's journal." I looked down at the black binder resting in my hands. The Carter Family Trust. Whoever stole the journal didn't know this binder existed. I asked quietly, "Do the police know?" "They're already here." "Did they force their way in?" The lawyer hesitated. "No. They used a key." That sentence made my stomach tighten. "A key?" "Yes. There was no damage. No broken locks. No broken windows. They walked in like they belonged there." I ended the call. Then I looked around the storage unit. For the first time, it no longer felt abandoned. It felt watched. Every tiny sound suddenly seemed louder. The buzzing fluorescent lights, the wind outside, footsteps somewhere down the hallway. I slowly walked toward the entrance. The parking lot looked empty, but just as I reached my car, I noticed a black SUV leaving the facility. Dark windows, no license plate on the front. It drove away before I could react. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. Instead of going home, I drove straight back to the lawyer's office. Police cars were parked outside. Yellow tape blocked the entrance. A detective introduced herself. "I'm Detective Sarah Mitchell." She shook my hand. "I'm sorry for your loss." Then she asked, "Were you the last person to see Mr. Carter's journal?" "I think so." She nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting, because whoever entered this office knew exactly where it was kept." She showed me a photograph. The filing cabinet had been opened. Only one drawer, only one folder disturbed. Professional, fast, planned. This wasn't random. The lawyer walked toward us. He looked exhausted. I've spent 30 years practicing law. I've never seen anything like this, Detective Mitchell asked. Did anyone besides you know where the journal was? He looked at me, then slowly answered, No. I noticed something. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it. My father taught me to watch pauses, not words. The detective left to answer another officer. I quietly asked the lawyer, Are you hiding something from me? He looked genuinely surprised. No. You hesitated. He sighed, then finally admitted, There is one thing. My heart sank. What? Your father didn't come to my office alone. What do you mean? The last time I saw him, someone drove him here. Who? I never saw the driver's face. They stayed inside the car. But your father made me promise. Never to mention it, I frowned. Why? He said, If Emily is forced to ask, then the wrong people are already listening. A chill ran through me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spread every document from the trust binder across my hotel room floor. Property deeds, investment reports, trust agreements. Everything looked perfectly organized. Too organized. Dad wasn't messy, but he wasn't obsessive either. Then, I noticed something strange. Every page was numbered. Except one. The numbers went 41, 42, 43. Page 43 was missing. Not torn out, removed cleanly, as if it had never been there. I searched the entire binder again. Nothing. Then I remembered the photograph, the one Dad had hidden inside the album. I picked it up. This time, I ignored the people. Instead, I looked at the background. There, reflected in the lawyer's office window, was something I'd missed before. A wall clock. It showed 8:17 p.m. The lawyer's office closed at 5. Why had they been meeting after hours? And why in secret? The next morning, I drove back to the storage facility, not because I expected to find more evidence, because something didn't feel finished. I searched every shelf, every cabinet, every box. Almost 2 hours passed. Nothing. Then, I sat down in Dad's old wooden chair. It creaked beneath my weight. Instinctively, I looked underneath the seat. Someone had carved tiny letters into the wood, so small. I almost missed them. E.M. not Emily Carter. My initials were E.C. Who was E.M.? Below the initials, Dad had carved a single date. October 14th. No year, just October 14th. I took a picture. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated. It wasn't a text. It wasn't a call. It was an email. No sender name, no subject. Inside, there was only one sentence. Ask the lawyer who Emily Morgan really was. I read it again. Emily Morgan, E.M. The initials carved beneath the chair. My father hadn't carved my initials. He had carved someone else's. I slowly lowered my phone. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking whether my stepmother had lied. I was asking something much bigger. Who was Emily Morgan? And why had my father hidden her name instead of mine? I must have read that email 20 times. Ask the lawyer who Emily Morgan really was. I didn't recognize the name, not even a little. No Emily Morgan had ever been part of my family. No one with those initials had attended my father's funeral. No one by that name appeared anywhere in the trust documents. Yet, my father had carved E.M. beneath the chair himself. That wasn't a coincidence. My father didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in preparation. I drove straight to the lawyer's office. The police had already finished processing the break-in. The yellow tape was gone. The lawyer looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. He hadn't slept. Neither had I. As soon as I closed the office door, I asked the question, Who is Emily Morgan? His face changed immediately. Not fear, recognition. He slowly removed his glasses. I hoped. You'd never have to ask me that. My heartbeat accelerated. So you know, he nodded. Yes, Who is she? He remained silent for several seconds, then quietly said, Emily Morgan was your father's first client. I frowned. Client? Before he built Carter Construction? Your father worked as a certified public accountant. That surprised me. Dad rarely talked about those years. He handled finances for several small businesses. Emily Morgan owned one of them. What happened to her? The lawyer looked toward the window. She disappeared. The word hung in the room. Disappeared? He nodded. 24 years ago. Police believed she simply left town. No evidence. No body. No arrests. I felt a chill. What does that have to do with my father? Everything. He opened an old filing cabinet, pulled out a worn folder. Across the front, someone had written, Morgan File. He placed it on the desk. Your father asked me to destroy this after his death. I stared at him. You didn't. He shook his head. No. Because I never believed the story was over. Inside the folder was an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local business owner vanishes without a trace below it. A photograph. A woman around 30 years old. Dark hair, kind smile, hazel eyes. Something about her looked strangely familiar. I couldn't explain it. The lawyer noticed my expression. You see it too. What? The resemblance. I looked closer. My breathing slowed. The eyes, the smile, the shape of her face. She looked like my mother, not identical, but close enough to be mistaken from a distance. Who was she? The lawyer answered quietly. Your mother's older sister. I froze. My aunt? He nodded. You were named after her. Every sound around me disappeared. My father had never mentioned another sister. Not once. Neither had my mother. Not even during childhood. Why? The lawyer continued. After Emily Morgan disappeared, your mother refused to talk about it again. She believed someone powerful was involved. I shook my head slowly. This can't be real. I wish it weren't. He slid another document across the desk. It was my birth certificate, nothing unusual, until he placed another document beside it. My aunt's birth certificate. Both certificates listed the same parents, the same hometown, the same family. My mother had hidden an entire sister from me, for my entire life. Why? I whispered. Why would Mom keep this secret? The lawyer leaned back. Because your father asked her to. I stared at him. My father. He believed the people responsible might still be watching. The room suddenly felt smaller. Watching? For 24 years? That sounded impossible. Yet, someone had stolen the journal only yesterday. Someone had known exactly where to find it. Maybe my father hadn't been paranoid. Maybe he'd been right. Before I could ask another question, someone knocked on the office door. Detective Sarah Mitchell entered. She carried a thin evidence folder. I thought you'd both want to see this. She placed several photographs on the desk. Security camera images from the night of the burglary. The first showed a man entering the building. Black cap, dark jacket, face hidden. The second showed him leaving. Still impossible to identify. Then the detective laid down the third image. My heart stopped. The burglar wasn't alone. Outside the building, waiting beside a silver sedan, stood a woman. She wore sunglasses, even though it was nearly midnight. I had seen her before. The reflection. The photograph hidden in Dad's album. The same woman, exactly the same posture, exactly the same scarf, exactly the same sunglasses. I pointed immediately. That's her. The detective looked surprised. You know her? No. But she's been following this story since before Dad died. The detective frowned. How do you know? I showed her the photograph from the album. She compared both pictures, then looked back at me. The height matches. The clothing style matches. The facial structure appears consistent. She closed the folder. I think you're right. The detective hesitated. There is one more thing. She removed a printed license plate report. We identified the silver sedan. I leaned forward. Who owns it? She looked directly at me. It isn't registered to your stepmother. It isn't registered to Ryan. It belongs to... She paused. Emily Morgan. Silence. I stared at her. That's impossible. She's been missing for 24 years. The detective nodded slowly. I know. Which leaves us with only two possibilities. I barely breathed. Either someone has been using her identity all these years, or Emily Morgan. She looked down at the registration one last time. Was never dead. I looked at Detective Mitchell, then at the lawyer, then at the thick trust binder lying on the table. For the first time since my father's funeral, everything finally started making sense. My father hadn't created a maze because he enjoyed puzzles. He created it because he knew one thing. If someone wanted his fortune badly enough, they would expose themselves trying to steal it. The missing journal, the stolen amendment, the late-night break-in, none of them were the real prize. The Carter family trust was, and the people chasing it still didn't realize they had already lost. 2 weeks later, the probate hearing began. The courtroom wasn't crowded, just family, lawyers, a few reporters, and Detective Mitchell sitting quietly in the back. My stepmother entered wearing an expensive navy suit. Ryan walked beside her. Neither of them looked at me. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I just felt finished. My father's attorney stood. Your Honor, before the will is considered, I request permission to introduce evidence concerning the Carter family trust. The judge nodded. Proceed. The attorney placed the trust binder on the evidence table. This trust was legally created 5 years before Mr. Carter's death. He handed certified copies to the judge. The trust, not the will, is the controlling legal document. My stepmother immediately stood. Objection. Those documents are fake. The attorney didn't even flinch. They've already been authenticated by the bank, the notary, and the state registry. The judge reviewed the certification, then looked at my stepmother. Objection overruled. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. Then Detective Mitchell took the stand. She calmly explained the break-in, the fingerprints recovered from the lawyer's office, the security footage, the timeline. Then came the final report. The fingerprints recovered from the empty journal folder match Ryan Carter. The courtroom became silent. Ryan jumped to his feet. I never stole anything, the detective answered calmly. Then explain why your fingerprints were found inside a locked filing cabinet that only contained Mr. Carter's journal. He couldn't, because there wasn't a truthful answer. Then my father's attorney stood again. There is one final recording. He connected a speaker. My father's voice filled the courtroom. Calm, steady, exactly the way I remembered. If this recording is being played, then the people I feared most have already tried to change my wishes. He paused. Margaret, when we married, I trusted you. When I discovered you had pressured me to rewrite financial documents, I stopped trusting you. Another pause. So I created the Carter Family Trust. Not to punish anyone, but to protect the one person who never asked me for anything. I felt tears fill my eyes. Then came the sentence that broke me. Emily, you spent your whole life believing I didn't notice your sacrifices. I noticed everyone. The courtroom disappeared around me. All I could hear was my father's voice. Every hospital visit. Every bill you quietly paid. Every holiday you gave up. Every time you chose this family. Even when this family failed to choose you. I closed my eyes. For years, I had wanted him to say those words. Now, he finally had. The recording continued. If you're hearing this, I wasn't able to tell you goodbye. I'm sorry, but I refuse to let your future depend on people who only remembered me when they wanted something. Then, the recording ended. No dramatic music, no final speech, just silence. The judge quietly removed his glasses. After reviewing every document, he delivered his decision. The Carter family trust is valid. The trust supersedes the contested portions of the will. The appointed successor trustee, he looked directly at me, is Emily Carter. The house, the business, the investments, the lake property, everything protected by the trust, remained exactly where my father intended, with me. My stepmother collapsed into her chair. Ryan stared at the floor. Neither of them spoke. As deputies escorted them from the courtroom to answer the fraud investigation, my stepmother finally looked back at me. There was no anger left, only regret. She whispered, "I'm sorry." Years earlier, those words would have meant everything. Now, they meant nothing. I simply nodded, not because I forgave her, because I no longer needed anything from her. A month later, I returned to my father's workshop alone. Morning sunlight streamed through the old windows. The unfinished birdhouse still rested on his workbench. This time, I finished it. Poorly. The roof leaned slightly. The paint wasn't perfect. Dad probably would have laughed. I placed it outside beneath the oak tree where we'd spent countless Sunday mornings together. Then I unfolded the last letter he had left for me. It contained only one paragraph. "A home isn't protected by walls, Emily. It's protected by the people inside it. If those people stop loving you, don't spend your life rebuilding the walls. Build a new home instead." I folded the letter carefully, looked toward the sky, and smiled. Not because I had won an inheritance, but because, for the first time in my life, I understood something my father had spent years trying to teach me. The greatest inheritance he left behind wasn't his money. It was finally knowing. My worth was never determined by the people who failed to see it.